Friendship plays a crucial role in a person's life during their teenage years. However, finding a true friend with whom you can genuinely connect throughout the years is not an easy task. Sometimes those we consider close to us have selfish or even sinister intentions, and recognizing this in time is not always possible. Britney Ujlaky, the main character of our story, lived in the small town of Elko, Nevada. Her family moved here from Colorado Springs in 2010 when her father, Jim Ujlaky, decided to take a job at the local mining company. The town seemed cozy and safe, perfect for living. The Ujlakys were happy to start fresh, but they didn't know that soon their lives would be shattered by a terrible tragedy. The tragedy that happened to Britney is not an isolated case. Every year, more and more teenagers become victims of violent crimes. Statistics show that the number of homicides among young people is steadily increasing. This case is not just a story about a horrible crime. It's a warning that even the closest people may turn out to be completely different from what they seem, and that our vigilance and attention to detail can save someone's life. So today I'll tell you about Britney Ujlaky, an ordinary girl whose life was cut short by an insidious crime. Britney adored horseback riding, and there were plenty of opportunities for that here. Cattle ranching and rodeo were traditional activities and hobbies of the locals, starting from a young age. This atmosphere immediately appealed to Britney. There was picturesque wild nature, horseback riding, and ATV riding, which the main character of the story enjoyed. Of course, all this may seem like boyish hobbies, but in these parts, they were enjoyed by both boys and girls. Such hobbies only added to the charm of the beautiful Britney. She was very close to her brother James, as the age difference between them was just over a year. The children, close in age, got along great, constantly spending time playing together and sharing each other's interests. However, such a mood prevailed throughout the Ujlaky family. They were close-knit and loving people who did not leave each other in difficult times. Even when the parents decided to divorce, the mother and father calmly settled all issues so as not to traumatize the growing generation. After that, they maintained a friendly relationship. They didn't even have problems with the division of property and custody rights. The former husband and wife reached an agreement without arguments. After the separation, Alicia moved out of her ex-husband's house but settled nearby so that they could continue to raise their children together and not force them to make unnecessary moves. The mother and father took turns picking up their son and daughter and constantly communicated with each other. Such behavior helped to smooth out the traumatic nature of the divorce process, which inevitably affects every child. In particular, thanks to this approach, Britney grew up to be an intelligent girl with strong moral principles and beliefs. She was very independent and not afraid of difficulties. Britney began helping her father and mother with household chores from an early age and was entrusted with quite responsible tasks. Nevertheless, Britney always coped excellently. By the age of 16, she had already matured enough and behaved like an adult. Britney was great in the saddle and could herd cattle. Helping out on the ranch tempered Britney's character and taught her a lot. She was admired by her loved ones and even neighbors who saw diligence and professionalism in her actions. At the same time, at the age of 16, Britney remained a typical teenage girl with appropriate interests, such as experimenting with makeup and clothes. Britney was an incredibly cheerful and friendly girl. After graduating from school, she dreamed of dedicating herself to studying psychiatry at university in order to be able to support people with mental disorders. The suffering of others always touched Britney deeply, so it's not surprising that this activity was among her top priorities. She aspired to fulfill herself in this direction. But despite all her wonderful qualities, in 2020, Britney faced bullying at school. Her best friend said that many people suddenly turned against the girl for no apparent reason. In her friend's opinion, the main motive for the bullying was jealousy and envy, as many girls envied Britney's beauty and intelligence. As a result, Britney had to switch to homeschooling. But she did not despair. Thanks to social networks, Britney found a small circle of close people who sincerely loved and supported her. Britney devoted even more time to her passion, horse racing, where she met like-minded people. It was there that she met Bryce Dickey, who was a few years older than her. They quickly got along and became friends. Britney always spoke of him as an older brother, although it seems the guy wanted more. He constantly spent time with his friend, and Britney herself got along well with his family. But despite this, their relationship remained purely friendly. Bryce was described as a polite and pleasant young man who, just like Britney, was always ready to help those in need. The similarity of characters brought these two together. On March 8, 2020, the friends agreed to meet to spend time together as they often did. On the same day, Britney's father, who played in a rock band, had a rehearsal. Britney gladly joined him before meeting Bryce. She was in a great mood, cheerfully chatting with all the musicians. Britney even invited Bryce to watch their performance, but the guy was late and missed the rehearsal. Bryce planned to pick up his friend in his car so they could watch a movie at his place, and then promised to take her back. It was assumed that Britney's father would return around 7:30, and by that time, Britney should have been waiting for him at home. When her father returned at the appointed time, it turned out that his daughter was not home yet. The man walked through the whole house calling Britney by name, but there was no answer. He began to worry and tried to call her, but her number was turned off. This seemed extremely strange, because usually responsible Britney always warned if her phone was about to die. She was never late, and even if she wasn't going to make it, she would definitely inform her family. The assumption that Britney could have simply forgotten about the arrangement or lost track of time and not noticed that the evening had come sounded absolutely implausible. The worried father turned to his son, but he also had no idea where his sister might be. Then the man contacted the last person with whom Britney was supposed to spend time that day, Bryce. The guy said that after a few hours spent in the city, he dropped his friend off at the school, where she met some young man unknown to him. After that, Bryce left so as not to interfere with their conversation. Britney's father was surprised why they didn't watch the movie as they had originally planned. Bryce claimed that he and Britney had simply changed their plans and decided to take a ride out of town. The father of the missing girl, of course, was interested in who she met, but Bryce did not know him personally. According to his description, it was a tall, light-skinned young man who looked like a cowboy. This information surprised the girl's father. It was unclear who the stranger was and why Bryce left his friend with him instead of giving her a ride home, as they had previously agreed. This was not at all like Bryce, who always cared about Britney. And here he just left her with some guy and drove away. A strange situation. Immediately after talking with Britney's father, Bryce wrote to her brother. He seemed to be very worried about what had happened and felt guilty for not taking his friend home. He said she herself asked to be left. But now Bryce realized the seriousness of the situation and feared that something might have happened to her. The only thing the guy remembered was the stranger's old Ford F-150 pickup truck, which he described as an unpleasant color. This detail only heightened the anxiety of the relatives because none of their acquaintances drove such a vehicle. Britney's entire family did not sleep that night, dialing her number hundreds of times, but the calls were constantly redirected to voicemail. In addition, the father and brother patrolled the streets in a car, driving around the school and the entire city, hoping to find the missing girl. They called her friends and acquaintances. Finally, one of the friends recalled that shortly before the disappearance, Britney had mentioned some guy named JT. She did not describe any details of their communication, but it seemed that Britney was going to meet with him. This lead seemed very important for the investigation. The worried parents then turned to the police, but they initially assumed that the teenager might have simply run away from home or was hanging out with friends and would return soon. But the family knew it wasn't like Britney. She had few friends and none of them knew where she was. The girl had never had problems with behavior or family, no addictions, mental disorders, or conflicts. No reason to run away. Her loved ones understood that such a disappearance concealed something bad. Eventually, the sheriff was convinced to take the case seriously. He was given all the information that could be gathered from Britney's friends and acquaintances. Then the police decided to question Bryce and arranged a meeting near the school so that he could describe in detail what happened when he dropped the girl off. Bryce said that they were driving around the Spring Creek area as usual. Suddenly, his father called and asked him to come home urgently to help with some errands. Britney agreed to postpone the ride, only asking to be dropped off at the school. She admitted that she wanted to meet her new acquaintance, JT. Bryce saw her heading towards a green pickup truck where a white guy in a cowboy hat was sitting, but he just drove away without even making sure if she got into the car. Bryce poorly remembered the details and didn't even pay attention to the pickup truck's license plate. The detectives did not suspect him of lying and decided to let him go, focusing on other areas of the search. The investigation decided to draw public attention through the media, hoping that someone might have noticed the guy in the cowboy hat and his green pickup truck. The police especially hoped to find out the vehicle's number, but the locals were in no hurry to share information. The sheriff turned to the telephone company to determine the last location of Britney's cell phone. It turned out that her phone had last registered activity 7 kilometers from the school where Bryce had dropped her off. Law enforcement immediately went to this address, hoping to find new leads. However, a thorough inspection of the area yielded no results. Britney's family and friends tirelessly patrolled the streets, posting flyers with her photo. More than 500 announcements were distributed throughout the city and its surroundings, but the locals stubbornly remained silent. No one was in a hurry to assist the investigation. It seemed that Britney had vanished into thin air. The mother of the missing girl even created a group on social networks where she constantly posted up-to-date information about the search progress. But even this did not yield results. Suddenly, she received a message from an unknown number. The anonymous person claimed to have kidnapped Britney and demanded a ransom of $25,000, threatening to feed her to the dogs if the demands were not met. Later, he wrote again, informing them that Britney was sick and could die without medicine. The criminal insisted that the captive would receive medications only if he was paid the specified amount. At first, the parents were ready to agree to this, but they decided to turn to the police first. Britney's mother called the police station and told them about the situation. She was immediately invited to come so they could try to track the extortionist's number. It seemed that the investigation had a valuable lead. While the officers were trying to establish the owner of the number, the head of one of the search teams contacted the police station. He reported that volunteers were combing the area 20 kilometers from the city and suddenly noticed a puddle on the side of the road that looked like dried blood. The team got out of their vehicles and began to examine the territory. 100 meters from the road, in the bushes, they found a blue tarp under which lay the body of a girl. She was face down, partially undressed. The description of the clothes matched what Britney was wearing on the day of her disappearance, but it was necessary to officially identify the deceased before informing the family. Right during the conversation with the missing girl's mother, a detective entered the office and said that the conversation would have to be postponed due to the urgent need to go to the place where the body was found. The woman burst into tears, feeling in her heart that it was her little girl who had been found. Unfortunately, the mother's intuition did not fail her. She recognized Britney. A few meters from the body, forensic experts found a keychain with her name, which was later identified as the victim's property. The girl had clearly been coerced into intimacy. Her pants and underwear were pulled down to her ankles. She had been strangled, and her throat was slashed. This was the cause of death. On the nearest bushes, officers noticed the victim's headphones, which were hanging from the wires caught on the branches. A used condom was also found here, and its packaging was lying next to the body. Now there was more than enough material to search for the criminal. The investigators were most interested in the new acquaintance, JT, about whom most people from the victim's circle had heard, but no one could say anything specific about him. Investigators were looking for this guy. The news of the murder shook the entire town. Almost all of its inhabitants knew each other by sight, so such a terrible crime could not but resonate in people's hearts. Particularly strong support for the Ujlaky family came through social networks. Bryce stood out the most as he had been in close communication with the victim's mother, father, and brother the whole time. He helped the family, cried, and said that he would never forget this bright person who had become a close friend to him. The detectives' work was just beginning. It was necessary to obtain warrants to examine the girl's computer and cell phone. In addition, it was necessary to analyze the discovered evidence, including the DNA from the condom, the main key to the puzzle. It was assumed that Britney could have been the victim of an internet predator with a propensity for sexual violence. Just in case, a list of registered sex offenders in the area who could be involved in the tragedy was quickly compiled and checked. All this needed to be compared in order to track down the criminal, but these processes take a lot of time, so the investigation dragged on. In parallel, the information from the kidnapper was being checked. The police quickly managed to establish the phone number from which the victim's mother had been called with ransom demands. Unfortunately, it was not registered in Nevada. It turned out to be a hidden number purchased on the internet, so it was not possible to track the data. However, the very fact of such messages spoke volumes. In the life of the Ujlaky family, there was clearly a person who took pleasure in such bullying and wanted to profit from this tragic case. According to the detectives, the one who used it was most likely connected with Britney's death. Of course, first of all, the investigators wanted to understand who JT was. It was believed that this young man was the most likely criminal. Having obtained data from the murdered girl's phone, law enforcement quickly tracked down the mysterious man. However, the detectives' disappointment knew no bounds. It turned out that at the time of Britney's death, JT was in Alaska. They had met shortly before the events described. Indeed, Britney and JT were going to meet, but he clearly could not be the one who used and killed her by slashing her throat. The guy had not left Alaska during that period, so it was a false lead. Investigators decided to check other guys and men with the same initials driving similar vehicles who lived in the city, its surroundings, and near the place where the body was found. The detectives managed to find only two. Both were young ranch workers driving green pickup trucks, but at the time of the murder they were too far away and had reliable alibis. The investigation had reached a dead end, so they decided to contact the family of the deceased again, hoping that some information might have been missed. Britney's mother said that a few weeks before her daughter's death, she had been dating a guy close to the cowboy lifestyle. He lived on a ranch and was engaged in rodeo, but they quickly broke up due to the girl's refusal of intimacy. Despite maintaining a friendly relationship, the breakup was caused by several unpleasant quarrels during which he wished Britney dead. However, after checking, this man also had a confirmed alibi. It seemed that the investigation was reaching another dead end. The last way to calculate the probable rapist and murderer remained: to review all the recordings from surveillance cameras in the city that could have captured a green pickup truck with a cowboy at the wheel. Fortunately, in the direction Britney was moving before her death, calmly sitting in her killer's car, there were several high-quality cameras. They provided a clear picture, but ahead lay dozens of hours of video footage. No matter how much time the investigators spent viewing it, they could not detect the vehicle Bryce had described. There was no green pickup truck. The strangest thing was that it did not appear on the surveillance cameras near the school where her friend had supposedly dropped the girl off. However, the police managed to notice something else, no less attractive to attention. The blue Chevy pickup truck that Bryce himself drove did indeed end up on the recording, but the guy did not stop or drop anyone off. He simply drove past the school without stopping. So, he had lied about the green pickup truck. The detectives then decided to trace the direction of his vehicle's movement. The young man had previously admitted that he had been driving around the area with his friend for several hours, but this also turned out to be untrue, given the results of watching the video cameras. They decided to request Bryce's cell phone data to compare his geolocation with the location of the attack victim. The detectives managed to quickly obtain a warrant to access this information, given the reasonableness of the suspicions. The young man was not informed about anything, fearing that they would spook the new suspect. It was obvious that he had been next to Britney the entire day. Their movement trajectories completely coincided, right up to the moment her mobile phone was turned off. Moreover, he had clearly been at the place where the deceased's body was found, and then went home. It became clear that the friend had been at the crime scene and had either killed the girl himself or witnessed the massacre. To confirm the assumption, it was necessary to conduct an examination. The guy was immediately asked to take tests and provide DNA samples. He agreed and submitted the materials, but for the time being, they were forced to let him go. The investigators did not tell him about their suspicions. On the contrary, they pretended that everything was fine. They said they were taking samples from everyone in the missing girl's circle to exclude them from the list of suspects. Skin particles were also found under the victim's nails. All these materials eventually matched Bryce's DNA samples. There was no doubt that he had engaged in sexual intercourse with Britney, but everything had happened involuntarily. Britney had been forced into this. Finally, Bryce was invited for questioning once again, without revealing their true intentions and the information that was already known to the investigation at that time. The young man agreed without resistance. As before, he behaved calmly and confidently. The detectives tried to find out if he had ever had a relationship with Britney, particularly a sexual one, but he denied any such arguments. According to him, the guy considered the girl more of a sister than a possible partner. After that, the investigators gradually began to lead the main suspect to the exposure of the lie. Obviously, if Bryce was telling the truth, no traces of his DNA would have been found. But the investigator reported that a condom with his seminal fluid was found at the murder scene. Perhaps realizing what the detective was hinting at, the young man changed his testimony. He began to claim that Britney had indeed flirted with him that day, which she had never done before. The story continued to transform. The guy said that they started kissing, then, by mutual agreement, engaged in oral sex with a condom. According to the suspect's story, this happened on the side of the road, where the body was later found. According to the young man, after intimacy, he still took her to meet another guy, but changed the address, informing them that they did not get out in the school area. Bryce continued to stick to the version with the guy in the green pickup truck, insisting that he did not see the cowboy properly, so he could not describe him in detail or name the car's number. The investigators summed it up. From Bryce's words, it followed that after the other guy picked up Britney, they, for some reason, went to the same place where the used condom was thrown away, and the body was later found. There, the stranger killed the girl. Of course, it all sounded absurd, especially given that no foreign DNA was found on the murdered girl's body. But there were plenty of Bryce's traces. They were found under the nails, in intimate places, and even on the neck in the area of the knife wound that doomed the girl to death. In addition, given Bryce's movement trajectory and surveillance camera footage, it was confirmed that the guy did not stop anywhere else, so this was another of his lies. The suspect was informed about all these discrepancies. Under the pressure of the investigators, the young man broke down and finally confessed that he had killed Britney, but called what happened an accident. The suspect insisted that she wanted rough sex with a knife and, in a fit of passion, impaled herself on the blade. It sounded completely implausible, given his constant lying. Finally, 18-year-old Bryce was arrested. This happened on March 19, 2020, and then searches were conducted in his house and car. After obtaining a warrant, the detectives came to Bryce's home. In the guy's closet, they found a pair of bloody shoes with traces of the victim, as well as a knife that was the probable murder weapon. A bloody hoodie was found in the trunk of the car. All of this contained the victim's blood, as well as numerous fingerprints and DNA samples from Bryce. After the family of the deceased was told who the killer really was, they were in complete shock. Britney's mother, father, and brother considered Bryce a decent young man, their daughter's best friend, and treated him like a son. The victim's relatives would never have believed that he had done it if there hadn't been such a large amount of incriminating evidence against the guy. The family trusted this person like a relative, and he simply took advantage of this with the most insidious purpose. The hearings began only 2 years later, in May 2022. On the prosecution side, there were many convincing witnesses, among whom was Bryce's ex-girlfriend. She told them who the ex-boyfriend really was, And this picture was strikingly different from most people's ideas about the defendant. The townspeople considered him a real cowboy and an exemplary guy, ready to help in a difficult moment. In reality, it was all just a mask. As you know, Britney's family trusted the killer because he looked after the girl in a brotherly way. He controlled her so that she would come home on time, carefully gave her rides, which seemed very cute. In fact, this was not done with the best intentions. He simply wanted to know everything about his future victim, as manipulators do. According to the defendant's ex-girlfriend, Bryce could sometimes be very aggressive and cruel. He constantly provoked quarrels and strangled her at least 4 times during conflicts. The last time it was so serious that Britney had already said goodbye to life. Fortunately, he did not cross the line. After she broke up with Bryce, the guy stalked and threatened her for a long time until the victim's parents began to threaten to contact law enforcement. The jury did not need to be convinced of the criminal's guilt for long, given the obvious evidence, but the lawyer fiercely defended his client, voicing the most absurd assumptions. After 9 days of hearings, it took the jurors about an hour to discuss the verdict. All the jurors agreed that Bryce was guilty of first-degree murder and coercion into intimate relations. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after serving a 20-year term. For the use of a deadly weapon, he received another 20 years. The same for abduction, and for coercion into intimacy by force, another 10 years were added to the sentence. Bryce went behind bars for life. He will be able to go free only after 70 years in prison. Most likely, Bryce will never be released. To the great regret of Britney's family, Bryce never reported the motive for the crime. It remained a mystery what could have provoked his aggression. However, the veil of secrecy was lifted by the deceased's friend. Britney knew that a few days before the murder, Bryce had confessed his love to Britney, but she did not reciprocate, suggesting that they remain friends. The detective suggested that the guy could not survive the rejection and harbored a grudge against her. And when he found out that she was communicating with a new guy named JT, he went off the rails, decided to teach his victim a lesson, and take revenge on her. The tragic story of Britney Ujlaky is not only a story about a brutal crime, but also a warning for each of us. This Britney became a victim of a person she unreservedly trusted, her best friend, Bryce. It was blind trust and the inability to see a person's true face behind the mask of benevolence that led to this tragedy. Britney, like her family, considered Bryce a wonderful guy, almost a family member. His care and willingness to help seemed like genuine manifestations of friendship, but in reality, manipulation and insidious intentions were hidden behind this. Bryce wanted to control the girl's every move, to know about all her actions and connections. And when Britney refused him in response to a declaration of love and became interested in another, Bryce decided to take brutal revenge. This story teaches us to be more careful in relationships, not to trust people blindly even if they seem to be the best of friends. It is worth paying attention to alarming bells, to incomprehensible or suspicious actions, to manifestations of aggression and excessive control. One cannot underestimate the danger and risks even when they seem unlikely. At the same time, the tragedy could have been avoided, or the crime could have been solved faster if law enforcement had acted more promptly and attentively. Initially, the police did not take the girl's disappearance too seriously, assuming that she could have run away from home or hung out with friends. If the investigation had started immediately, perhaps Britney could have been saved. In addition, the girl's family and friends believed Bryce's words for too long, although there were many inconsistencies and contradictions in his story. If they had suspected something wrong earlier and shared their doubts with the investigation, it could have expedited the disclosure of the crime and the arrest of the killer. So this story is a painful but important lesson for all of us. A lesson that you cannot blindly trust even the closest people. That you should listen to your intuition and pay attention to alarming signals. That the law enforcement system sometimes fails and needs improvement. Radical ideologies often cross the line of common sense, causing their followers to lose touch with reality. It's even worse when the victims of manipulation sincerely begin to believe in the illusions imposed on them. One example of the tragic consequences that blind faith in destructive ideas can lead to occurred in Sweden, a country that has always been considered one of the safest in the world due to its extremely low level of violent crime. In the small Swedish village of Björnberg, on July 27, 1971, a boy named Helen Fossmo was born into a family that was not particularly religious. He became one of 5 children in the family. Despite the lack of religious upbringing, at the age of 12, Helgi independently became interested in the church and joined a local youth religious group, becoming one of its most active participants. Although his parents did not share their son's enthusiasm, they did not hinder him, believing that it was not the worst occupation for a teenager. According to Helge himself, it was from the moment he joined the church community that his life acquired true meaning, and he found a kind of salvation in faith. For the next 5 years, the young man completely devoted himself to religion, constantly attending church services and participating in various church events. In 1988, fate led Helge to a cafe for Christian youth, where he met his future wife, Helen Johansson. The young couple got married as soon as they came of age and settled in the town of Bordenberg. The couple had 2 children, and Helge continued to delve into religious issues, becoming a preacher in the local community. However, in 1993, a fateful meeting took place that radically changed the life of Helge and his family. The man met Asa Waldau, a charismatic leader of a Christian sect known as the Bride of Christ. Asa came from the tiny town of Knutby, where her teachings originated, with the intention of opening a branch of her church in Bordenberg. Knutby is such a small settlement with a population of about 700 people that there is only 1 store, 1 restaurant, a church, and a few dozen wooden houses scattered among the forest. It would seem that in such a cozy corner, there is no place for evil. But it was here at that time that people lived who later committed 3 horrific murders that overshadowed the crimes of many serial killers in their scale and cruelty. Asa traveled from town to town, preaching her teachings and recruiting new followers, especially among young people. She masterfully manipulated people's minds, urging them to give up everything worldly and devote their lives to serving her church. Helge's family turned out to be an ideal target for the ambitious Bride of Christ. Helge's first meeting with Asa did not go quite smoothly. The devoted Christian expressed doubts that a woman could be a pastor. However, thanks to her remarkable manipulative abilities, Asa managed to convince the Fossmo family to join her sect, not suspecting what tragic and irreversible consequences this would lead to. Skeptical of Asa's radical views and methods, especially after realizing her affiliation with a sect, Helge initially rejected the idea of joining the Bride of Christ community. However, the ambitious preacher did not give up. She was interested in attracting the young Fossmo couple to her ranks, so she acted cautiously and methodically. Over the next 4 years, Asa gradually gained the trust of Helge and Helen, convincing them of the safety of her church's activities. At the same time, she promoted her own teachings, which increasingly captivated Helge. Eventually, in 1997, the couple agreed not only to join Asa's community, but also to move to the town of Knutby, where her church was located. At first, the move was presented as an ordinary, friendly visit. Asa showed the young family her church from the inside, told them about its activities and goals. Gradually, she increasingly gained the attention of her new followers, criticizing the shortcomings of the traditional church, which eventually sowed a seed of doubt in Helge's mind. A significant part of the residents of Knutby already belonged to Asa's religious community and were involved in various areas of the church's activities. The organization provided work for everyone who wanted it, and almost every member of the community had their own responsibilities, often related to religious service. This brought people together who knew each other well, supported and protected their own. The community gladly accepted the new preacher Helge and his family into their ranks. Having become a pastor of the church in Knutby, Helge quickly drew attention to himself with unconventional motives in his sermons. He often spoke on taboo topics such as sex and death, interpreting them rather dubiously. Despite the fact that not all parishioners shared the radical approach to the interpretation of Scripture, Helgi relentlessly pursued his mission. 2 years after the move, the Fossmo family had their third child, which increased the burden on the parents. They decided to hire a nanny, Sara Svensson, who had recently moved to Knutby, inspired by Asa's teachings. Sara had grown up in a deeply religious Christian family, but from childhood suffered from severe allergies, which limited her life. The girl was cared for by her mother, with whom she had a very close relationship. But at the age of 11, Sara lost her mother due to a long illness. This event devastated the girl, turning her into a troubled teenager who often ran away from home. After his wife's death, the entire burden of raising his daughter fell on the father. Despite all his efforts, the man could not fully replace Sara's mother, although they also had a close bond. The girl stayed with her father until she accidentally met Asa during her travels around the cities in search of new followers. Their acquaintance took place at Bible courses and quickly grew into a close friendship. Sara turned out to be an ideal candidate for recruitment into the sect. For the experienced manipulator Asa, it was not difficult to discern the girl's vulnerable spots and skillfully use them to lure her into her community. Eventually, Sara decided to move to Knutby to be closer to the church and comprehend the ways that Asa preached. During this period, Helgi became closer to Asa than ever before. They spent a lot of time together, not only delving into the study of Scripture. This couple claimed to receive divine messages, which they interpreted as prophecies. Helgi diligently wrote down these revelations in his diary, describing in detail the visions, sensations, and their interpretation. One of these records stated that God named Helgi the King of Kings and Asa the Queen of Heaven. According to the pastor, he appeared in the world even at the time of the creation of the world, and since then had been waiting for a meeting with an equal being, Asa. The woman, in turn, insisted that she should marry Helgi, because their union would elevate the alternative religion to an incredible height. Both unreservedly believed in these ideas. In 1999, they arranged a kind of sacrament, the wedding ceremony of Helgi and Asa. The man gave her a ring with 7 diamonds, because this number has a sacred meaning in many faiths. And all this despite the fact that Helen was still the official wife of the pastor. Of course, such a course of events caused unbearable jealousy on the part of Helen, which led to a rift in her relationship with her husband. Then Asa intervened. She criticized the young wife for jealousy, calling this feeling the most shameful for a true Christian. The sect leader insisted that Helen should change her attitude, otherwise the community would find a way to create serious problems for her, in particular, to take away the house. The intimidated woman was forced to come to terms. The relationship between Helgi and Asa took on an increasingly strange hue. Despite the fact that the pastor was still officially married, he hardly engaged with his family, spending all his time with Asa. This became especially noticeable after their sacrament. The woman constantly showered him with love and praise, attaching him to herself more and more. Asa skillfully used Helgi's devotion not to build a strong relationship or even to separate him from his wife. Her only goal was to establish complete control over the man. Acting insidiously and effectively, she quickly achieved her goal. Helgi found himself completely dependent on her. Asa knew everything about him, and sex, which they constantly engaged in, became the most powerful weapon of manipulation. At the same time, the sect leader convinced the pastor that he could literally embody Jesus. All these absurd ideas multiplied like a snowball, and the behavior of Helgi and Asa became more and more outrageous and abnormal. Neither Helen, nor the children, nor other members of the community could influence this situation. Given Asa's manipulative nature, tensions in the Knutby community grew steadily, portending inevitable tragedy. In December 1999, the town was gripped by an epidemic of illness, which did not spare the Fossmo couple. Confined to bed by illness, Helga and Helen were forced to transfer most of the household chores to nanny and housekeeper Sara Svensson, who miraculously escaped infection. On the morning of December 18th, despite feeling unwell, the couple had breakfast together, after which an exhausted Helgi decided to lie down to rest. Having fallen fast asleep, the man heard a knock at the door through his dream. Upon waking up, he found that his wife was nowhere to be found. It turned out that a concerned neighbor had come to their house, who had not heard any news from the couple all day. Helgi assured the neighbor that everything was fine, but he insisted on seeing Helen. The woman did not respond to loud calls, although she definitely had to be at home. Remembering that his wife was going to take a shower, Helgi became worried about her long absence. The men decided to check what had happened. Since Helen did not respond to her name, they had to break the lock with a screwdriver. In the overflowing bathtub, they found the lifeless body of a woman floating face down. The door was locked from the inside, and Helen was still wearing the nightgown she had worn at breakfast. Helgi's eerie scream attracted the attention of several neighbors who ran to the house. Together, they pulled the body out of the water and tried to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation, but it was too late. 27-year-old Helen was pronounced dead. The autopsy revealed that the deceased woman had a serious head injury that could well have been fatal. The forensic expert suggested several possible causes of death. Obviously, the resulting traumatic brain injury could lead to loss of consciousness and, as a result, drowning of the young mother. Even more questions were raised by the results of a toxicological examination, which revealed an extremely high dose of opioids in the victim's blood. According to calculations, this amount of drugs would be enough to kill Helen, but the woman never took any drugs. Despite all the signs of a possible murder, law enforcement officers classified this case as an accident. They concluded that Helen slipped, fell, and hit her head on the faucet. Sara Svensson's testimony played an important role in this, confirming every word of the pastor that his wife was alone in the bathroom and no one could kill her. Helgi appeared grief-stricken and sincerely saddened by the loss of his beloved wife. However, those who knew him more closely noticed some strange changes in the behavior of the widower. In particular, he almost immediately got rid of all the things associated with Helen and never mentioned her again, even forbidding the children to talk about their mother. Some suspected that Helen's death was not an accident, but that the unwanted wife was simply gotten rid of so that she would not interfere with ambitious plans. In addition, it became known that the man personally influenced the conclusion of the forensic medical examination. At first, Helgi, citing religious beliefs, demanded that an autopsy not be performed at all, but he was refused due to the suspicious circumstances of the death. Then the preacher insisted on removing information about the presence of opioids in the blood of the deceased from the conclusion. He explained his demand by the desire to minimize the likelihood that his wife could have committed suicide, because it is a sin because of which her soul will not go to heaven. With these dubious actions, Helgi allegedly sought to protect Helen's memory and the reputation of his family from shame. Suddenly, during this period, Asa lost interest in Helga. Their stormy romance was cut short when she once again went on a pilgrimage and decided not to return. Unfortunately, the charismatic leader managed to thoroughly brainwash the pastor, who was filled with determination to continue on the path of the sect. Despite the ostentatious grief and tears, Helgi very quickly found a new love in the person of Asa's sister, Alexandra Waldau. The relationship between the lovers developed rapidly, greatly facilitated by Helga's high status. At that time, many considered him a person close to God, so they treated him with great respect, which also bribed Alexandra. Already in the spring of 2000, she moved into the pastor's house and soon they got married. However, even a new marriage did not curb Helga's sexual appetites. One woman was always not enough for him, so already in the spring of 2001, he began to actively court the nanny of his children, Sara Svensson, who still worked in his house. The girl readily accepted signs of attention from such a respected man. Their relationship even received a blessing from the sect leader Asa Waldau. By the time these events unfolded, Helga's relationship with Alexandra had deteriorated. Nanny Sara, who became the pastor's lover, tried to support him in solving family problems. Helgi cynically took advantage of the girl's sympathy, often inviting her to pray together in the church. During these prayer meetings, the man often inclined Sara to intimacy, insisting that this had nothing to do with satisfying carnal desires, but was a kind of spiritual union and a message to God. So strong was Sara's belief in Helga's righteousness that she willingly believed these stories and even felt some kind of divine inspiration at such moments. The girl sincerely believed that she was doing a godly deed, although in fact she fell into the trap of a skilled manipulator who covered himself with spiritual values, having goals far from religion. Shortly after the beginning of this relationship, Helgi began to voice increasingly contradictory statements. At first, he declared that the Lord was waging his battles on earth, and the pastor himself was his warrior. According to Helgi, this mission was not easy, because sometimes it was necessary to remove various obstacles along the way. The man spoke in riddles, and the naive Sara, who perceived her lover's sermons as divine revelations, willingly believed everything. In fact, Helgi was gradually probing the ground for the implementation of his insidious plan. Later, the pastor began to tell that during sex, God sends him important messages about the fate of his second wife, Alexandra. Helgi interpreted these signs as a portent of her imminent death. Brainwashing Sara, he claimed that the Lord had shown him the ideal life companion, herself, the nanny. Moreover, Helgi intimidated the girl by saying that he himself could die if his marriage to Alexandra was not dissolved. Although during this period their union was falling apart at the seams, the pastor could not get a divorce due to strict church rules. Like all the women in Helga's entourage, Sara was enchanted by his stories. With these bizarre messages, he gradually led the nanny of his children to commit a terrible act. The skilled manipulator managed to firmly tie the victim to himself, using his authority in the church and knowledge of Sara's vulnerabilities. Helgi adopted many techniques of such control from Asa, and now willingly put them into practice. At that time, many people seriously considered the pastor to be the person closest to God, so it was not difficult for him to persuade the nanny to his side. According to Helgi, the girl had to help the Almighty in the battle with demons, for which she needed to move in with him, despite the fact that he was still living with Alexandra. The women lived in different rooms, and Helga had sex with both of them every night in turn, each time justifying it as a fight against evil spirits. The pastor called intimate relationships a ritual of purification from defilement. His eloquence allowed him to convince his mistresses that he was a messenger of heaven, and in this way opposed the enemies of the Lord. These peculiar three-way relationships lasted until 2003, although Helgi already wanted to get rid of Alexandra, with whom he allegedly broke up, but could not officially divorce. During this period, the manipulation of Sara reached its apogee. For the most part, Helgi turned to her only for sex, and the rest of the time he insulted her, calling her a sinner and an arrogant blonde. But each time he ended the emotional torture with the phrase, "I love you." The girl was so happy with these three words that she stopped paying attention to all the insults. She was willing to do anything to earn the favor of the chosen one of God, a fighter against demons, not even noticing how, along with this, she was losing her own will, turning into a puppet in the hands of a dangerous man. Against the backdrop of problems with his second wife, Helgi repeatedly asked his mistress if she was ready to kill in the name of the Lord. If earlier Sara hesitated with the answer, now, it seemed, she reacted more calmly, and the pastor felt that he would soon be able to persuade her to do it. The girl replied that she was not ready, but resisted much weaker than before. Then, to push Sara on the true path, Helgi created a new account in the Messenger and began sending her messages from an unknown number, trying to convince her that it was God himself who wanted to contact her. In these creepy correspondences, the girl was told that she had little time left and she had to kill in the name of the Lord no later than November 25th. When Sara suspected that Helga was behind these messages, he angrily denied his involvement, once again shaming his mistress, accusing her of a lack of faith and sinfulness. Unfortunately, it worked as it had before. Afterward, the pastor began sending Sara messages that she should become part of the divine plan, sending human souls to heaven. This alleged God claimed that for her, this was the only way to salvation. Helga's manipulations and intimidation led Sara to begin to fear for her soul and dare to commit a crime. On November 8, 2003, she broke into the pastor's house and attacked his wife Alexandra, who was sleeping in her bed. Sara hit her with a hammer, but the woman miraculously managed to survive and fight off the attacker. The reason for the attack was a message that Sara allegedly received from God via messenger. It contained an order to immediately kill the preacher's wife. Oddly enough, the criminal escaped punishment, probably due to Helga's insistence not to report the incident to the police. Indeed, no record of this event was found in the law enforcement database. Instead of punishment, the pastor expelled his former mistress to live with her own father. However, this did not affect Sara's correspondence with God in any way, which only fueled her terrifying confidence in the need to kill. Shortly after these events, Helga found a new passion, a neighbor, Annette Lind, who at that time was married to a man named Daniel. Having decided to get rid of a competitor, the preacher began sending messages to Sara, manipulating her in the same way as before. The frightened girl, seeking salvation, again agreed to take up arms. This time, Sara prepared more thoroughly. She bought a pistol and even researched on the internet how to make a homemade silencer. Following the instructions of the Almighty, she hoped for success and the liberation of her soul. On January 10, 2004, at 3:30 in the morning, Sara, keeping in touch with Helga, drove up in her father's car to the area where the pastor lived. Having parked 500 meters from the house, the killer put on a black mask and put on shoes of different sizes to throw the police off the trail. Entering through the unlocked door, the lock of which the organizer of the crime broke in advance, staging a robbery, Sara crept into the room of 23-year-old Alexandra, who was sleeping soundly. Having shot first in the thigh and then, when the victim woke up and screamed, in the head, the criminal killed the woman. At 4:30 in the morning, Sara went to the house of the second victim, Daniel, the husband of Helga's new mistress. The pastor knew that the man was left alone that night and told Sara about it. The doors were locked, so the girl just knocked. When 30-year-old Daniel opened the door, she shot him in the chest without hesitation, and when he fell, once more in the head. Fleeing from the crime scene, Sara did not suspect that the second victim had survived. Daniel managed to get to the phone and call for help. Arriving at the call, the police found him conscious, so he was able to describe the attacker. At that moment, 32-year-old Helgi was already at the crime scene, allegedly trying to help his neighbor. Helgi accompanied the wounded Daniel to the hospital, where he learned about the murder of his wife Alexandra. The pastor again began to play the role of a grief-stricken husband. The description of the attacker provided by Daniel was rather confusing due to the mask on her face. Gradually, attention focused on Helgi and Sara. One of the neighbors, whose brains had not yet been washed, recalled similar strange circumstances of the death of the pastor's first wife. Information also surfaced about the hammer attack on Alexandra, during which she nearly died at the hands of Sara. The bloody fingerprints found at the scene of Alexandra's murder and on the door of Daniel's house became irrefutable proof of the 26-year-old nanny's guilt. Sara was immediately arrested. At first, she insisted that she acted independently, without anyone's prompting, and then began to claim that she committed crimes in the name of God. During a search of Sara, a phone was seized, where Helga's number and another unknown subscriber were found. Although no correspondence with the Almighty was found on this device, the detectives came across a call from Sara's old number. Thorough searches of her house revealed another mobile phone, which stored more than 1,000 text messages with God. These messages contained intrusive manipulation and incitement to murder. After tracking the unknown number, the investigation led to the pastor of the local church. Learning about this, the disappointed Sara, who sincerely believed in the divine origin of the correspondence, told the police the whole truth. The wounded Daniel's wife, Annette Lind, was also suspected of complicity and arrested, but 2 weeks later, she was released without charge. During the trial, the arrogant Helge denied his involvement and showed no remorse. A psychiatric examination found him sane. The scale of the manipulations was staggering. Having sufficient evidence, the prosecutor's office proved Helge's guilt in inciting the murder of Alexandra and the attempt on Daniel's life. In July 2004, the pastor was sentenced to life imprisonment with the right to parole after 24 years. Despite several appeals that were rejected, Helge will only have a chance for early release in 2028. He was also accused of involvement in the death of his first wife, but was acquitted due to lack of evidence, although the prosecutor is convinced of his guilt. In 2007, while in prison, Helge married for the third time. The identity of his new wife remains unknown. During an interview in August 2006, the imprisoned pastor admitted his involvement in the murder of Alexandra and the attack on Daniel, claiming that several other people were involved in organizing the crimes. However, the case was never reopened. Currently, Helge Fossmo is serving his sentence in the maximum security prison Tidaholm in Sweden. At the trial, a video was shown with a reconstruction of the crime, where Sara spoke in detail about what she had done. A private investigation revealed that the court was shown an edited version, while the original 6-hour recording contained discrepancies with the actual details of the crime. In interviews with journalists, Sara adhered to the false reconstruction of events. This raised doubts about the true course of events and the identity of the main culprit. It was assumed that the murderer could be the pastor himself, who shifted the responsibility to Sara. Sara Svensson, recognized as insane, was placed in a psychiatric hospital. In 2011, after completing treatment, she was released, as doctors considered her safe for society. In 2020, sect leader Asa Waldau was convicted on 8 counts of assaulting former parishioners and sentenced to community service. The woman changed her last name, moved, and withdrew from church affairs. Thanks to the efforts of doctors, Daniel survived the attack but refused to return to the city, fearing the local church and sectarians. Another pastor of the same church, Urban Feld, was convicted of sexual exploitation of persons dependent on him. Several women from the community whom he called his daughters and manipulated. The moral of this chilling story is that blind faith and fanaticism can lead to terrible consequences, especially when manipulated by ruthless and charismatic individuals. The tragedy in Knutby demonstrates how religious beliefs, taken to extremes, can cloud the mind and push people to the most terrible acts. The main tragedy of this story was not only the murder of Alexandra and the attempt on Daniel's life, but also the ruined lives of all those who fell under the pernicious influence of Pastor Helge Fossmo. Sara Svensson suffered the most, a young girl who, due to naivety and gullibility, became a toy in the hands of an experienced manipulator. Her sincere faith was cynically used to achieve selfish goals, which led to irreparable consequences. To protect yourself from such situations, it is necessary to always maintain critical thinking and not allow anyone to manipulate your consciousness, even if it is a spiritual leader. You cannot blindly trust authorities and follow instructions that are contrary to morality and common sense. Faith should be a conscious choice, not an instrument of control in the hands of other people. It is important to remember that true religion brings love, mercy, and forgiveness, not hatred, condemnation, and violence. As a Christian, I am convinced that God calls us to love our neighbors, not kill them. The Bible says, "Everything beyond this is from the evil one." Excess and fanaticism in any area of life is a sin that leads to the destruction of the individual and the world around them. This story is a warning for each of us. It reminds us of the need to always think independently, not succumb to manipulation, and not allow anyone to use our faith for selfish purposes. Only in this case will we be able to preserve the purity of our soul and not become a tool in the hands of villains. Dear viewers, thank you for being with us until the end of this difficult story. I hope it became for you not only a fascinating plot, but also a reason to think about important things, about faith, love, and true values. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Do not let anyone blind your mind and take possession of your will. May your faith be a light that shows the way to goodness, and not a weapon in the hands of villains. Be vigilant, trust your heart, and always remain human. Philip Grandine was born in the late 1980s in the Canadian city of Paris, Ontario. Although little is known about his childhood, those close to him describe the boy as self-confident, sociable, and quick-witted. Philip was always one of the best students in school and even received a scholarship to study in middle school. The young man's leadership qualities were vividly manifested in 2003, when at the age of 17, he became the first participant in a competition called Miss Paris. Later, this competition was renamed Paris Fair Ambassador, and that's where Philip won an honorable second place. The purpose of this event is to encourage young people to achieve in various spheres of life. Participants get the opportunity to develop their skills and communicate with the city's residents. Just a year later, Philip graduated from Paris District High School with the distinction of Most Outstanding Student. After that, he entered the theological faculty of the seminary, which he successfully completed in 2007. Eventually, the young man became a pastor of the Evangelical Baptist Church on Ennerdale Road. It was within these walls that fate brought him together with a kind and sweet girl named Carissa Darwin, who worked as a volunteer in Baptist churches. Carissa, as she called herself, was born on November 10, 1981, in the city of Pasay in the Philippines. Her family consisted of her mother Maria, father Marvin, and sister Hannah. In search of better work and education, the Darwin family dared to emigrate to Canada in 1994. They settled in Toronto. Relatives and friends described Carissa as an extremely responsible girl, an exemplary daughter and sister. Striving to become a professional in her field and earn a living independently, Carissa got a part-time job while studying at the University of Toronto. In 2006, she earned a bachelor's degree with honors in human biology and archaeology. Soon, the Carissa began working as a risk assessment specialist at the Barclay Company in downtown Toronto. Those close to her characterized Carissa as a wonderful person with a pure and tender soul. She was very devout and actively participated in the life of Baptist churches. 2 years after graduating from university, the Carissa not only achieved success in her career, but also finally found her love. Parishioners who attended the same churches as Carissa said they considered her an exemplary and good woman who lived to serve her faith. The girl was very popular and loved in these circles. Everyone admired her inspiration and positivity despite her struggle with liver disease. Carissa never complained and was always happy and smiling, even when enduring pain. Those around them believed that Philip was a great match for Carissa, as both were united by love and respect for the faith. The relationship between them developed rapidly. It seemed that the lovers genuinely adored each other. And, as Christian couples usually do, they swore their love and fidelity before the altar in the presence of their brothers and sisters in faith. After the wedding, the couple moved together into a small bungalow in the city of Scarborough, Ontario. After 3 years of happy marriage, the couple received stunning news. Carissa was pregnant. The expectant mother was over the moon with happiness. She passionately dreamed of a child and was delighted at the thought that she would soon meet her little Geladin, as she affectionately called her unborn baby. But the Carissa's joy quickly faded when in August 2011 she learned of Philip's infidelity. The man was having an affair with a woman Carissa considered her friend. As if that weren't enough, the homewrecker turned out to be a parishioner of the same church where her husband was a pastor. And to top it all off, Carissa made another discovery that completely shattered her world and undermined her dreams of a happy family with Philip. It turned out that her spouse had an addiction to pornography. So not only was the man cheating on his wife, but he was also violating the commandments of his religion while holding the position of pastor. Despite all the pain, the always gentle Carissa was ready to forgive her husband and take him back. She loved Philip more than anything and wanted to continue building a family with him. The girl even found the strength to forgive Carissa, with whom he had cheated on her. But forgiveness alone was not enough. Not wanting to sit idly by, Carissa dared to seek help from a church mentor named Stephen. Philip and Carissa had known him even before the beginning of their marital relationship. The girl told him that her husband had a physical and emotional connection with another woman, a parishioner of their church. In response, Stephen offered to help them through couples therapy. Philip agreed and seemed to sincerely want to stay with his wife and return to the righteous path. But in reality, it was not so simple. The man's actions had consequences, and it was impossible to fix the situation with a wave of a magic wand. At one of the therapy sessions the couple attended every Thursday, Stephen advised Philip to renounce his position in the church. The main argument was that his behavior did not correspond to the role of a pastor and spiritual leader of the community. At the same time, Stephen asked Philip how he could give advice to others when such a fierce struggle between faith and carnal desires was raging inside him. He also noted that from all perspectives, it was wrong to be a pastor of a church that his mistress continued to attend. Moreover, in Stephen's opinion, by giving up his job as a priest, Philip could avoid temptations and devote all his energy to his family. Despite his annoyance at such advice, deep down, Philip understood its validity and did not dare to refuse. In the end, he agreed to leave his pastoral work. When it was revealed during therapy that the man also had problems with pornography, Stephen again insisted on decisive measures. Since Philip seemed unable to control his base instincts, the only way to prevent him from accessing such content was to install a filter on his computer. And this time, the advisor urged him to focus on restoring his relationship with his pregnant wife. Philip seemed to have repented of his actions and heeded the pastor's instructions. He gave up his position as a clergyman and got a new job as a nurse and administrator at the Neil's Place nursing home. But despite the appearance that Carissa had managed to mend their relationship, the reality was far from ideal. As it turned out, Philip had not broken off ties with his mistress at all, but simply carefully hid his tracks. He regularly met with his paramour, each time choosing cozy nooks in the interior of his own car for these passionate rendezvous. Carissa, though kind and forgiving, was by no means a naive fool. So soon she learned about her husband's ongoing lies. Faced with this fact, in early October 2011, the girl decided to tell Stephen about Philip's new infidelities during a family therapy session with the pastor. And just a few days later, on the 14th of the same month, the pregnant woman was admitted to the hospital complaining of dizziness, fatigue, and other symptoms. While in the emergency department, she called her sister Hannah and told her what had happened and what she had already told the doctors. Carissa confessed that the illness began after she drank a milkshake prepared by her husband. The girl even bluntly asked Philip if he had laced the drink with something, but he denied everything. But the truth was that Carissa's suspicions were not at all unfounded paranoia. A toxicology analysis revealed traces of lorazepam, better known as Ativan, in her system. This drug is strictly forbidden for pregnant women, as it can harm both the mother and the unborn child. Carissa spent the whole night under medical supervision, and as soon as her condition improved, she was discharged home. But just a few days later, on October 17, 2011, Philip called an ambulance by dialing the emergency services. According to the man, he had gone out for a morning run and returned home only to find his pregnant wife lifeless under the water in the bathtub. The dispatcher did everything possible to give Philip clear instructions and calm him down a little. In the recordings of the conversation, the operator can be heard ordering the man to drain the water and transfer Carissa's body to a flat surface to begin cardiopulmonary resuscitation and continue it until medics arrive. Instead, Philip stated that he could not perform CPR because he was not sure how to do it correctly. This was quite strange because he himself worked as a nurse and surely had to know the basics of saving lives. He also claimed that he was unable to get Carissa out of the tub because she was too slippery and wet. The dispatcher continued to give advice on how to lift his wife. She suggested putting a towel under her armpits for better traction, but Philip replied that this did not help him either. In fact, the man did not even bother to pull the plug so that the water would begin to drain into the sewer. This would have made the task of pulling out the body much easier. Throughout the 911 call, the sound of splashing water could be heard in the receiver. When paramedics and police arrived at the scene, they saw a picture that clearly indicated that Philip had done absolutely nothing to save his wife and their unborn child. After all, Carissa was still lying under the water. The 29-year-old woman, who was 20 weeks pregnant, was immediately taken to the hospital, but unfortunately, neither she nor her unborn baby could be saved. The autopsy showed that the cause of death was indeed drowning. As soon as Carissa and her child were pronounced dead, Philip was taken to the police station, and only after more than 2 hours of interrogation was the widower able to return home. The day after his wife's death, Philip met with Stephen. They began discussing the details of the funeral, and when the pastor suggested buying a double plot in the cemetery, the man flatly refused. He said that someday he might marry again, so he did not want to be buried next to his first wife. Such a response seemed extremely strange and inappropriate for a person who had just lost his pregnant wife. Carissa's funeral service took place 2 weeks later at Jarvis Baptist Church. Numerous parishioners with whom the deceased had communicated, as well as her friends and relatives, were present at the ceremony. Among those present was Philip's mistress, who for many years was also considered Carissa's friend. For those who knew about her connection with Philip, this woman's appearance at the funeral was an act of unprecedented offense and disrespect. However, it was not only the audacity of the homewrecker that caused outrage. People also condemned Philip for not lifting a finger to kick the mistress out. But this was not the only thing that angered the public. Many were outraged by the outright lie that Philip allowed himself in the obituary published in the Toronto Star magazine immediately after Carissa's death. In it, he called the deceased his beloved wife and best friend. He wrote that they were eagerly awaiting the arrival of the baby, who was now in heaven with its mother. But everyone who doubted the sincerity of these words turned out to be right. Everything indicated that his wife's death and that of their unborn child did not sadden Philip in the least. On the contrary, it seemed that this tragedy had become a kind of liberation for him. In the following months, when the widower should have been mourning the loss of his family, he continued to meet with his mistress several times a week. And only in the period from January to February 2012 did the man seem to decide to end this affair. Meanwhile, rumors about the former pastor's outrageous behavior spread like wildfire. Public discontent also grew due to the inaction of the authorities, who seemed to have no intention of investigating the suspicious circumstances of the pregnant girl's death. But despite the lack of information in the media, the police did take up the case. During the investigation, detectives concluded that the man deliberately gave Carissa prohibited substances with the intent to kill her. Eventually, in May 2012, Philip was arrested on charges of intentional murder. An official spokesman for the Homicide Division stated that they did not have any direct evidence that would allow them to put the suspect behind bars. Instead, investigators had a whole set of indirect evidence pointing to Philip's guilt. Despite the seriousness of the charges, the judge ruled that the accused would remain under house arrest on his parents' farm in Brant County until the trial began. By the way, the names of his parents were never disclosed to the public. People in those parts were shocked by the news of Philip's arrest. A neighbor named Linda shared her thoughts with reporters. She said that she simply could not believe that the man was involved in Carissa's death. According to her, in the 2 years of living next door to the Grandine couple, they had become close friends. Linda considered them the perfect couple. Philip and Carissa often visited her in the summer to drink lemonade and chat. They were always so calm and friendly. Carissa recalled how she celebrated Philip's birthday with them and even met their friends and relatives, and none of them ever noticed even a hint of violence in this couple. Linda said that their relationship was so warm that when the couple found out about Carissa's pregnancy, they immediately came to her house to share the joyful news. She also recalled how they constantly joked that with the arrival of the baby, Linda's life would change forever. Carissa added that although she saw Philip's anxiety about becoming a father, she still could not believe that he was capable of such a terrible act, because the man had always been kind and seemed happy next to his wife. Another neighbor, Maria O'Kane, told the media that on that fatal night she was at home and was extremely surprised to see police cars. According to her, Philip was stunned by the tragedy and publicly told everyone how he and his wife were expecting a child and what a grief it was to lose them both. Maria simply could not believe that a man who loved his wife so much could harm her. And then began the long and painful path to justice. The authorities were convinced that Philip had not only betrayed his marriage vows, but had also devised an insidious plan to get rid of his wife and their unborn child. Prosecutors intended to get to the truth and hold the man accountable for premeditated murder. But the trial in this case did not begin until 2014, 2 years after Carissa's death. The prosecution argued that the nurse and former pastor Philip had given his wife a drug that acted as a sleeping pill, and as soon as she became helpless, the man carried her into the bathroom and allowed her to drown. The probable motive was said to be Philip's desire to get rid of the bonds of marriage in order to be with his mistress, a former parishioner. It was only during the trial that her name became known, Aline Florentino. Throughout the hearing, Philip did not admit his guilt and insisted that his wife either committed suicide or drowned by accident. However, the amount of evidence gathered against him was staggering. Testifying in court, Dr. Irwin Gore stated that since Carissa became his patient in 2002, he had never prescribed her either tranquilizers or lorazepam. Carissa had been under the supervision of this particular family doctor for a long time, so it was extremely strange that she had never needed such medications before, and then suddenly they were found in her body. The physician also noted that on September 28, 2011, just over 2 weeks before Carissa's death, Philip had come to see him. The man complained of depression and said that he had some family problems that he had consulted with a pastor about. Dr. Irwin recalled that Philip then confessed that he was not sure if he would choose Carissa again if he had the chance to marry again. The court also heard testimony from obstetrician Howard Berger. The doctor unequivocally made it clear to those present that he had not prescribed the medications found in the victim's body. The testimony of both physicians played a crucial role in reinforcing the prosecutor's position on Philip's involvement in his wife's death. The prosecution also presented to the court the results of the toxicology examination conducted after Carissa's death. They showed the presence of lorazepam in her blood. The results of blood tests taken a few days earlier, when Carissa was hospitalized for disorientation and drowsiness, were also presented as evidence. That test also revealed lorazepam in her system, albeit at a lower concentration than at the time of death. The judges were also told that Carissa herself suspected foul play when these symptoms appeared. On October 14th, while in the hospital, she told her sister about her certainty that it was Philip who had drugged her with prohibited substances. The prosecution insisted that the events unfolded according to this very scenario. Carissa's hospitalization on October 14th was a kind of rehearsal for Philip of the planned crime. This incident allowed him to determine the necessary dosage of the drug to increase it to a lethal level 3 days later. Prosecutors argued that the man had been hatching his insidious plan for at least a week. To confirm this, they disclosed information gathered by the police computer service. Experts found in the search history on Philip's computer that on October 10, 2011, a user logged in from his account was interested on the WikiAnswers site whether 100 milligrams of Ativan would be lethal. The same specialist testified that on the morning of October 14th, just when Carissa was being treated for poisoning, someone on Philip's behalf was searching the internet for information about treating an overdose. And just 4 hours after his wife was discharged from the hospital, someone from his profile was again Googling information about lorazepam. To reinforce their theory, the prosecution called Philip's former boss to the stand. He was to explain how the nurse could have obtained a prescription drug. The administrator of the Niels House Center, Catherine Fior, said that Philip worked for them as an assistant to the senior nurse. He dispensed medications to elderly clients and was responsible for disposing of excess drugs. In this regard, a Toronto police computer expert also testified that during a search of the suspect's laptop, he found a report dated June 2011 about medications prescribed to residents of Neil's house, among which lorazepam was listed. Thanks to the computer seized from Philip, detectives learned another important and alarming detail. The court was told that during the emergency call to the police, the suspect claimed that on the day of Carissa's drowning, he had gone for a run and only returned home at 10:45. But it appears that the adult content filter installed on his PC was turned off about 40 minutes before the specified time. This proved that Philip had actually been in the apartment the entire time while his wife was taking a bath, and that he had lied about his whereabouts. The testimony of the pastor's former mistress did nothing to portray Philip as an innocent man. Carissa told the court that their relationship began when she shared her personal problems with him after a church service. She also claimed that Carissa knew about their relationship and even wrote to her on social media, saying she was aware of everything. But perhaps the most horrific detail Aline mentioned was that on the eve of the discovery of Carissa's body, Philip had talked to her on the phone for a full 30 minutes. The witness further confessed that the same evening, as soon as the man left the police station after interrogation, he came to her house and had intimate relations with her. According to Aline, although Philip often jokingly suggested that they just run away together, he never hinted at anything violent. At the end of her testimony, the mistress stated that despite everything that had happened, she still considered Philip her friend. The defense insisted on the defendant's innocence and claimed that Carissa had actually voluntarily taken the medication with the intention of taking her own life, supposedly because of the severe depression that gripped her after the news of her husband's infidelity. The lawyers also argued that the prosecution could not prove that it was Philip who gave his wife the drugs. In January 2015, after 2 days of hearings, the jury reached a verdict. Former pastor Philip Grandine was found guilty of manslaughter. At a later hearing, the judge announced the sentence: 15 years in prison. In announcing his decision, the justice noted that the depth of the immorality of the defendant's act went beyond the imagination of any sane person. After the sentencing, the victim's sister, Hannah, along with their mother, read a statement on the courthouse steps. They said that Carissa really was a good and generous soul. Relatives never stopped missing her every day and knew they would miss her until the end of their lives. The family added that they believe everything is in the Lord's hands, and that they would always be grateful for the thoughts and prayers of everyone who supported them during this difficult time. Unfortunately, the feeling of just retribution for Carissa's family was short-lived, because after an appeal filed by Philip, the court overturned his conviction. The reason was that the judge of first instance had made a mistake in answering the jury's questions. Therefore, a new trial was scheduled, at which the defendant was to answer for only one count of the charge: manslaughter. That is, the prosecution could no longer claim that Philip intended to kill his wife. After that, the man was released from custody until the start of the new trial, which did not begin until 2019. The prosecution insisted that Philip had decided to get rid of his wife in order to continue his relationship with his mistress and satisfy his obsession with pornography. Prosecutors also speculated that perhaps he had shown criminal negligence by allowing his wife to get into the bathtub, knowing about her state of severe drug intoxication. The defense, on the other hand, argued that the deceased had taken lorazepam voluntarily and could have either taken her own life or been the victim of an accident. This time, the court did find Philip guilty of manslaughter. The man was released on bail pending the final sentence, and during its announcement, Carissa's mother, Maria, stunned everyone with her statement. She said that her world had shattered when she learned about her drowned daughter. Maria added that the attack on her daughter and unborn grandson was not just murder, but also blasphemy against the victims and the Lord himself. She demanded that those guilty of this crime be justly punished, because she felt that Carissa was crying out for justice from her grave. The victim's father, Marvin, who lived in the Philippines, confessed before his death that the tragic way his daughter's life was cut short had irreversibly changed and ruined his own world. According to him, the news of Carissa's death had shocked him so much that throughout the journey to Canada, the man was tormented by severe dizziness. He almost lost consciousness and was hospitalized, but insisted on being discharged in order to be in time for his daughter's funeral. Later, Marvin learned that during this trip, he had suffered 2 strokes, triggered by the unbearable stress of the loss. In January 2020, Philip was again sentenced to 15 years in prison. The judge concluded that the accused was hostile to his wife and secretly laced her with prohibited drugs to get rid of her. The justice added that the man's actions were deliberate, carefully planned, and staggering in their diabolical cruelty. But strange as it may seem, the second trial and the repeated sentence did not put an end to this case. Unwilling to accept his fate, Philip filed another appeal and was released on bail again, pending a third trial. This time, it was his last attempt to challenge the court's decision, because an appeal can be filed no more than 3 times. The defendant's legal team put forward 3 arguments against the conviction. First, they argued that there was no evidence that their client knew that Carissa had taken lorazepam and the risks she was exposing herself to by getting into the bathtub. Second, the lawyers insisted that the punishment was excessive. The prospect of a new trial made the victim's family lose faith in justice. It seemed that as long as Philip continued to roam free, Carissa and her loved ones would never be able to find peace. Relatives recalled how the man who had promised to love and respect their daughter had betrayed his word and cruelly cut short her life. And now it seemed that he would never face the punishment he deserved. In May 2022, after 10 years of suffering and pain for the Darwin family, the Ontario Superior Court rejected Philip's defense arguments. This was an important step towards the execution of the sentence he had long evaded. The conclusion of the 3 judges stated that the evidence confirmed that Philip knew about the danger his wife was exposing herself to by taking lorazepam on the night of her death. Therefore, the justices found it quite reasonable to assert that the man was aware that Carissa had taken the medication on the day of the tragedy as well. After all, she was bound to exhibit the same sedative symptoms as 3 days earlier. Logic and experience as a nurse should have told Philip that his wife had taken the drug again. And knowing about the serious side effects, he was obliged to intervene as soon as he learned of her intention to get into the bathtub. The judges also recalled that the defendant had a nursing degree and worked in a nursing home where, according to the evidence, these medications were prescribed regularly. So he surely must have known about the well-known risks of taking them. Having made all these arguments and stating that the defense's position was absolutely groundless, the court upheld the sentence of 15 years in prison. As soon as it became known about the final decision to send Philip to jail, Carissa's sister, Hannah, made a statement to the media. She said that it was a real relief for her and her family to learn that the murderer would finally be in prison for the crime for which he had been found guilty not once, but twice. The girl added that the judicial system should send a clear signal. Victims of domestic violence matter. And if women and mothers could not be protected from violent actions, then at least the criminals should be held properly accountable for it. Hannah stressed that the person involved in her sister's death had resorted to various procedural tricks to delay the inevitable as much as possible, whereas Carissa Grandine never had a chance to appeal because her own husband had sentenced her to death, acting as a judge who was too cruel and unfair. Since Carissa passed away in October 2011, an endless nightmare began for the Darwin family. And this tragedy struck them after all the trials they had overcome by moving from the Philippines to Canada. They came to a foreign country, full of hopes and dreams for a better future. But unfortunately, Philip crossed their path. When Carissa first met him, none of her loved ones could even imagine that behind the mask of a pious man hid a dark essence. A villain capable of repaying the girl's love and devotion with the most insidious and cruel betrayal. So, this chilling story has finally come to an end. After long years of litigation, justice has finally prevailed. Philip Grandine, who brutally cut short the life of his pregnant wife Carissa, will spend 15 long years behind bars. Although this will not bring back the deceased, at least her family will be able to find some peace. They fought for the truth with their last strength and did not give up, even when the case seemed to have reached a dead end. The Darwins proved that the memory of a victim of domestic violence is worth fighting for to the end. And if you enjoyed this story, subscribe to my Detective Brooks channel. Here you can find many more tales about the most high-profile and mysterious criminal cases from around the world. The Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles has a sinister reputation. Over nearly a century of its existence, it has been the site of numerous tragedies and mysterious events. But even against the backdrop of this grim history, the case of Elisa Lam stands out. What happened to the 21-year-old Canadian student within the walls of the Cecil in 2013 still haunts those seeking the truth. The police investigated this case for a long time, but ultimately concluded that it was a suicide. However, there are far too many puzzling and suspicious elements in this story. It's all too easy to discern the outlines of a deliberate and brutal murder. So, what really happened to Elisa Lam? Why was her body found where it was found? And most importantly, who killed her and why, if it was indeed a murder? Today, we will try to unravel this mysterious story and separate facts from speculation. Elisa Lam, a 21-year-old girl originally from China, emigrated to Vancouver, Canada in 2003 with her family, consisting of her father, mother, and sister. Thanks to the large Chinese diaspora living in this city, adaptation was quick for all family members. Soon, the Lam family rented a small Chinese restaurant and led a quiet, measured life. According to regular patrons of the establishment and neighbors, the immigrant family was welcoming and friendly. Elisa, a brown-eyed girl with dark hair, was fluent in English, although she had vision problems. She was a first-year student at the University of British Columbia, which ranks 40th among 17,000 universities worldwide. The girl was responsible and hardworking, working part-time on weekends and evenings in clothing stores, and later got a job at a bank. Elisa loved to travel, and even the lack of company did not stop her. She independently visited Washington State, Ottawa, Toronto, and Niagara Falls. She dreamed of going to Los Angeles and Hollywood in the near future. In December 2012, Elisa broke up with her boyfriend, and already in January 2013, the diligent student received a Christmas bonus. She told her sister about her desire to go to America to gain new experiences and get rid of the negative feelings associated with the breakup. The funds were there, and the parents did not object. The solo journey began in San Diego, where Elisa arrived on January 22nd. And on the 26th, the girl arrived in Los Angeles and settled in the Cecil Hotel. It is worth pausing at this point and telling the story of the hotel chosen by Elisa. The Cecil was built in the 1920s. It was a 15-story building designed for wealthy people and businessmen. However, the owners later changed their policy, renting out rooms for long periods at low prices. The hotel's reputation rapidly declined. From a pretentious, fashionable establishment, the Cecil turned into a cheap hotel that barely reached 3 stars. The hotel has repeatedly become the final refuge for suicides. In 1954, Helen Gurney, exhausted from fighting a serious illness, threw herself out of a 7th-floor window. In 1962, Julia Moore also jumped from an 8th-floor window due to pregnancy by a man who refused to acknowledge the child and a difficult financial situation. Pauline Otten jumped from a 9th-floor window after an argument with her husband. She fell on top of Giorgi Giannini, a passerby. Both died on the spot. Another dark page in the hotel's history was the murder of guest Goldie Osgood, who was found in her room in 1964, brutally beaten and raped. This crime remains unsolved. After the Elisa Lam incident, journalists began to savor all these facts, calling the Cecil a hotbed of evil and otherworldly forces. But it is worth remembering that the hotel is located next to the troubled Skid Row area. In the 40s, half of all crimes in Los Angeles were committed there. This real tumor of the City of Angels attracted serial killers who simply wanted to be closer to their victims and get lost in the lists of cold cases. As for the suicides, everything is quite prosaic here as well. People who had financial and personal problems often stayed at the hotel with an unfortunate location and low prices. All suicide cases were investigated. Over 90 years of the Cecil's existence, only one murder occurred there, which is not that much. It is hardly possible to confidently state that the hotel is run by evil forces based on one case. This is a typical example of a cheap hotel where criminals and people with mental disorders sometimes stay. Finally, let's return to Elisa Lam. She checked into the hotel on January 26th and intended to leave on February 1st. According to the employees, the girl behaved normally, did not demand anything, and spent most of her time outside the hotel. So, it was not possible to establish exactly what Elisa was doing from January 26th to 29th. On the 29th, she left a text message on Tumblr. "I'm staying in a terrible hotel. By the word terrible, I mean tasteless. But it was built in 1928, it's Art Deco. So yeah, the hotel is cool. I think Baz Luhrmann should have filmed The Great Gatsby here." What Elisa did on January 30th is unknown. On the 31st, the staff saw her in the lobby. She was talking to her parents. Around noon, she visited a bookstore. On February 1st, Elisa did not call home. The girl had a particularly strong connection with her family. There was an agreement that she would call them every day, which she did with pleasure. After waiting until the evening of the first day of February, her father called Elisa himself. There was no answer. Then, around 8 in the evening, he called the reception. The duty manager reported that the stay at the hotel had expired on February 1st. Since the reservation was not extended, the staff vacated the room, and her belongings were waiting in the storage room. The manager did not know where their owner was. The Lam family immediately went to the nearest police station. An officer helped them file a report dated the 1st. On February 4th, the case from the Los Angeles Missing Persons Department almost immediately went to the Homicide and Major Crimes Division. The reason for this decision is unknown, as there was no data on the commission of crimes against Elisa Lam. Perhaps the police acted preemptively. Or maybe they found coincidences with previous crimes. In any case, the disappearance of the Canadian student was handled by detectives from the most prestigious and competent criminal investigation unit. On February 5th, they arrived at the hotel. On the same day, 2 dog handlers with dogs were called in and began to inspect the building. They even checked the technical floor. This floor could be reached by elevator, but it was impossible to exit without a special key. The roof, which was locked with an electronic lock, was also checked. The opening was recorded on the hotel security alarm panel. There was no data on unauthorized opening or lock breakage. The police decided to play it safe. Search activities involving dogs did not yield any results. Elisa's fate remained unknown. Detectives seized video recordings from the hotel's surveillance cameras, ATMs in the lobby and neighboring buildings, and street camera footage. They had to analyze 800 hours of video recordings from January 31st and February 1st. While viewing the video recordings, the police came across a stunning find. The camera captured the missing girl in the elevator a few hours before her death. Other cameras did not record Elisa Lam leaving the hotel, so she remained inside. From the data that came from Canada, it became known about Elisa's diagnosed bipolar disorder. This is a veiled name for psychosis, which is characterized by an alternation of 2 states: lethargic, depressed, and excited active. The disease had a mild form, and according to the doctor, did not pose a danger to others or to Lam herself. She took medication with her on the trip. On February 19th, the story of the missing Canadian student made an incredible zigzag. On the evening before and the morning of the 19th, several hotel guests complained about an unpleasant smell and strange color of the water. the Cecil Hotel had a personal water tower, 4 tanks with a volume of approximately 7,500 liters each, installed on the roof to maintain hydraulic pressure in case of water supply interruptions. The plumber decided to start checking the water quality with them. Inside one of the tanks, half filled with water, he found a floating body. According to him, this happened at 10 in the morning. At 12:49, a patrol officer officially reported that he saw a naked female body in the water. At approximately 1 o'clock, a whole column of firefighters and police officers began to pull the corpse out of the tank. Residents of Los Angeles watched the operation live. The television broadcast was conducted from helicopters of several TV channels. In addition, a whole flock of reporters settled on the roofs of neighboring buildings and near the entrance to the hotel. At 3:45, the body was pulled out of the tank. At 4 o'clock, the identity of the deceased was established. It turned out to be Elisa Lam. No one doubted this. On the evening of the same day, all residents of the United States learned about the incident. In the water tank, where the female body swollen from decomposition was floating, they found black men's shorts size M, a green t-shirt size L, a set of black lace underwear, a pair of black sandals, a red fleece jacket size XS with a hood and zipper, a wristwatch, and a key card for the Cecil Hotel. The absence of important items is surprising: a wallet, phone, and glasses, which were never found either in the room or near the body. The autopsy, conducted by a forensic expert, brought quite intriguing results. Of the intravital bodily injuries, 2 skin defects were identified under the knees of both legs. Abrasions 2.5 centimeters long on the right leg and about 1 centimeter on the left. It was established that Elisa had sexual intercourse shortly before her death, and drowning did not fit the case of Elisa Lam's death at all. On the inner side of the eyelids and the sclera, there were pinpoint hemorrhages, a sign of mechanical airway obstruction. The nasal passages were not blocked. This meant that after the body was removed from the water, there was no abundant discharge of foamy liquid from the lungs, and the release of foam is a significant sign of death by drowning. There was no water in the lungs, which means there was no reflex inhalation underwater. The girl got into the tank without breathing or with weakened superficial breathing, but Elisa Lam's death was announced as a result of drowning. Thus, Lam's death, which was not a drowning, was still declared a drowning. The police seized the medications that Elisa Lam took on the trip. Trace amounts of drugs were found in the liver, but the peak of action had passed long before death. They did not cause the death. On June 21st, the Los Angeles police put a bold end to their investigation, concluding that Elisa Lam committed suicide due to an exacerbation of bipolar disorder. Law enforcement agencies chose the path of least resistance, blaming the victim herself. How familiar this is. I wonder when they will start punishing law enforcement officers for negligence and unwillingness. Despite the fact that the Los Angeles police put an end to the investigation, recognizing Elisa Lam's death as a suicide due to an exacerbation of bipolar disorder, the public was not quick to agree with this. There were too many strange and incomprehensible things in this story to simply take and believe the official version. Both journalists and people who were simply not indifferent to the event saw a mystical trail in it, the dark intervention of otherworldly forces. But is everything really so mysterious? Perhaps it is worth looking for a more rational explanation? Let's agree with the police conclusion for a minute and consider this case from the point of view of suicidology. People who are prone to suicide have certain characteristic signs of behavior that an experienced specialist will notice immediately. From 70% to 90% of potential suicides in one way or another inform their loved ones, relatives, friends, about their intentions. But Elisa Lam did nothing of the sort, no alarming conversations or hints. Most women and girls who try to commit suicide do not die the first time. They either get scared at the last moment or just want to attract attention to themselves. Usually, the second or third attempt becomes fatal, although some practice this much longer. But Elisa, as far as is known, did not have any previous suicide attempts at all. The main reason for suicide is unbearable mental and physical pain that a person seeks to get rid of at all costs. But Elisa had a completely legal and effective way to deal with this: individually selected medications that she took under the supervision of a doctor. Why would she kill herself if the suffering could be overcome with medication? By the way, about the doctor. Elisa was being treated by the well-known psychiatrist Sara, who had an impeccable reputation and many years of experience. There were never any complaints about her work, which means the diagnosis and therapy were correct. And if Elisa really had suicidal tendencies, Sara would certainly have noticed it. After all, suicides, even unconsciously, give a lot of signals that an experienced specialist recognizes unmistakably. But the doctor was so confident in the stable condition of her patient that she calmly let her go on an independent trip abroad. She hardly would have done this if she had the slightest doubts. Yes, Elisa took the medications prescribed to her. So what? This is not at all an indicator of abnormality, rather the opposite. A person who follows the doctor's recommendations and regularly takes medication is usually quite adequate, able to control emotions and cope with stress. Moreover, with bipolar disorder, there are never hallucinations or delusions. Toxicological examination showed that on the eve of her death, Elisa did not drink alcohol or use drugs, and this could have exacerbated the manifestations of the disease. Another argument against suicide is the complete nudity of the body. Women who commit suicide never undress, because even in the last minutes of their lives, the thought that someone will lustfully examine their bodies is unbearable for them. But according to the official version, it turns out that Elisa undressed completely, threw all her clothes into a tank of water, and jumped in there herself. Isn't that strange? Moreover, death by drowning is terrible and painful. If the girl really wanted to end her life, she would have chosen something faster and simpler. Well, at least a jump from the roof. Fortunately, she was there. By the way, guests of this hotel who committed suicide usually jumped from windows, not drowned. Perhaps the key to this strange story lies in the video that captured Elisa Lam's last minutes of life. The police released this recording on February 13th, but there is one nuance here. In fact, the camera took these shots not on January 31st between 2 and 3 o'clock, as officially stated, but in the first half of February 1st. This was done so that investigators could check the testimony of eyewitnesses about the girl's last day of life. That is, the recording that got on the internet is not the original. So, the recording that got on the internet and caused such a stir is not actually the original. Before making the video public, forensic experts worked on it a lot. Some fragments were slowed down, some were accelerated, the date and time were hidden, and individual moments were cut out. Perhaps this was done because someone who was next to Elisa in her last hours got into the frame, and the investigation decided to hide this information. But even from this castrated video, certain conclusions can be drawn. Let's start with the fact that the girl enters the elevator on the 14th, the highest of the residential floors. She leans towards the buttons, presses them along with the door hold button. She is wearing the same clothes that will later be found at the bottom of the water tank. There are no glasses or, it seems, contact lenses on her. Elisa has to lean over to see the numbers on the buttons. The girl's movements are unhurried. She calmly stands in the corner of the cab. Analysis of her nonverbal behavior proves that Elisa is in a relaxed state, not feeling fear or anxiety. This is evidenced by the position of her arms and legs. It seems that she is waiting for someone, but some time passes, and no one enters the elevator. Then, Elisa approaches the exit, quickly looks out into the corridor, presses herself against the wall, almost in the same place where she was standing before. And a second later, she abruptly steps towards the elevator control panel, presses her back against the wall, as if she wants to be in the zone of invisibility. This maneuver looks more playful than anxious. Body language reveals embarrassment, but not fear at all. However, no one looked into the elevator, so after a short wait, Elisa slowly looks out into the corridor again, watching the part of it to the right of the elevator. The girl glances to the left, probably assuming that the one she was waiting for had already passed while she was hiding in the corner. Then, she jumps out of the elevator on both legs. Experts regarded these actions as foolishness, a game. Elisa clearly did not feel danger and was not really hiding. Further, remaining in the corridor, the girl moves to the left edge of the doors and disappears from the camera's view for a moment. Then, in the frames, you can see the edge of her skirt and part of her shoulder. Elisa slowly raises her arms above her head. Most likely, she is fixing her hair. Analysts see these actions as an expression of sexual interest. Having dealt with her hair, she returns to the elevator. Her arms are widely spread. Lam is trying to calm down. She is in a state of strong emotional excitement. Many experts note that at this moment, Elisa, strange as it may seem, is laughing. The violent reaction is caused by the fact that someone made her laugh. Again, leaning towards the panel, Elisa begins to press the buttons with both hands. At the end, she presses the door hold again, makes a 1-second pause, and another series of pressing and holding. Having finished with the buttons, the girl exits the elevator, slowly fixing her hair. Opposite the exit is a mirror, and preening in front of it does not at all fit with fear or anxiety. When exiting, Elisa puts her elbows forward. This is how she tries to appear more confident. She stands to the left of the doorway, and although the resolution of the recording is low, experts discerned Lam is smiling. Perhaps not quite sincerely. Further, the analysis of nonverbal behavior records. The level of insincerity increases along with the level of anxiety. One of the markers is Elisa touching her shoulder with her fingertips. It is clearly visible how she leans over, as if talking to someone standing to the right of the elevator doors. At the same time, the girl actively gesticulates. Experts note excessive playfulness, a playful mood. There are no signs of fear. The eerie moment seems unnatural, only because it is here that the recording was slowed down. Let's not forget that it was worked on a lot. Elisa rises several times on the toes of her right foot. This indicates a remarkable optimism, maybe even joy. And again, sexual interest is noted. It all ends with the girl leaving the camera's field of view in the direction opposite to where her interlocutor was standing. The recording continues, and we see the elevator doors close and open twice. It is difficult to imagine that one can experience such emotions and perform such actions alone. As you know, mentally ill people, being in the grip of hallucinations, demonstrate specific motor skills. But nothing of the sort was observed in Elisa's behavior. Most likely, shortly before the described events, she met someone, perhaps even had a romantic relationship. On the video, the girl is playing hide-and-seek with her invisible companion. And although sometimes she shows some embarrassment, most likely, this is due to the fact that the acquaintance was short-lived, so Elisa felt a certain constraint and shyness. But definitely not fear. Almost throughout the entire recording, an element of play, flirting, sexual attraction is clearly visible in the girl's behavior. And only the realization that we are seeing her last minutes of life gives the video an eerie tinge. But in itself, this footage does not contain anything frightening. So, the conclusion suggests itself. There was someone else next to Elisa. Someone who knew about the surveillance camera in the elevator and carefully avoided its gaze. Someone who knew that, by some strange coincidence, the video surveillance in the corridor of the 14th floor, which usually worked constantly, was turned off this time. So this someone could freely communicate with Elisa without fear of being noticed. What happened next? Let's turn to the plan of the 14th floor. On it we see A. Smokeless fire escapes, B. Internal fire escapes, one of which leads to the technical floor and the other to the roof. The doors to the internal stairs are locked with an electronic lock. It is impossible to open them unnoticed by the security. At that time, no attempts to pass through these doors were recorded. There remain the smokeless stairs mounted on the outer walls of the hotel. They can be used to reach the roof without much effort. This has been repeatedly proven by bloggers and journalists who penetrated there in this way. There were no obstacles to this. Only desire and a little courage were needed. If you perceive this as a romantic adventure, especially in the company of a person to whom you feel sympathy, then it can even be fun. It is quite possible that such a proposal caused Elisa the joy that can be noticed in several moments of the video recording. Most likely, the girl met her future killer even before February 1st, and it is just as likely that she voluntarily agreed to intimate closeness with him, as well as to climb to the roof together. Maybe she even undressed of her own free will. Until some fatal moment, Elisa's relationship with her killer was playful and quite friendly. And then some incident provoked an acute conflict. Murderers often commit crimes under the influence of aggression that arises in response to actions or words that are unacceptable to them. For serial killers, this is doubly true. They attack not every potential victim, but only the one whose behavior seems offensive to them. It seems that Elisa's killer did not torture or mock her. Most likely, he used a chokehold with his forearm, a technique from which even an adult man loses consciousness in just 15 seconds. This method has two important features. Firstly, it does not leave visible traces, and secondly, it leads to rapid loss of consciousness without the ability to resist. Having strangled Elisa, the criminal raised her unconscious body to the tank roof using a ladder that was always stored there. This explains the absence of the girl's fingerprints on the stairs, and then, through the hatch, he lowered her into the water. Recall, Elisa was strangled, as indicated by pinpoint hemorrhages on the inner side of the eyelids and sclera found during the autopsy. At the same time, her mouth was not forcibly closed. Otherwise, there would have been injuries from the teeth on the inner side of the lips. No significant amount of water got into the lungs, which means there was no deep reflex inhalation underwater. Elisa ended up in the tank, either completely without breathing or with weakened superficial breathing. After that, the killer searched her clothes, taking the money, phone, and glasses. He had to get rid of the phone. It could have contained their correspondence and photos. He probably spent the money and kept the glasses as a trophy. Having searched the clothes, the criminal threw it into the same tank. He did not try to imitate suicide. He just hid the body. The person who killed Elisa Lam is cold-blooded, prudent, and has experience in such matters. Perhaps she had already committed similar crimes before. The killer perfectly understood what the police would pay attention to and how he should act in order to remain unnoticed. It is possible that he knew water will destroy biological traces. If you look at the circumstances of Elisa Lam's death without bias, it becomes obvious that this is not at all like suicide. Did the Los Angeles police investigators not understand this? No, they were perfectly aware of everything. It's just that the reason they decided not to open a criminal case was extremely pragmatic. After all, if there is a bullet, there must be a gun. If there is a stab wound, there must be a knife somewhere. This is how murders usually happen. But when there is something incomprehensible, vague, something that is difficult to prove, it is better to close the case at the stage of inquiry. Why waste effort and time on searches that may turn out to be in vain? Even if this murder was committed by a maniac, it is worth waiting for the next episode in order to understand the criminal's model of action. By the way, a similar crime occurred just a month later. In Los Angeles, even without Elisa Lam, there are enough murdered women. Police resources should not be spent on an investigation that is minimally likely to end in a court verdict. Statistics require an increase in crime detection rates. Elisa Lam's parents demanded compensation from the hotel for negligence. After all, unhindered access to the roof still exists. But negligence can be seen in this story literally in everything. Many questions remain for the investigation. Can we assert that everything happened exactly as described above? Of course not. This is just one version. Yes, there are huge databases that describe the typical behavior of murderers. They work well as an example. But can we say with certainty that the criminals who are caught are similar to those who are still at large? Perhaps the police catch those who have primitive motivation? What if they ended up behind bars precisely because of the predictability of their actions? It is quite probable that Eliza became the victim of someone whose actions cannot be explained. We can only hope that someday the truth will come out. So, summing up this eerie and mysterious story, I want to express my personal opinion. Despite the official version of the Los Angeles police, I am convinced that Elisa Lam was the victim of a murder. There are too many inconsistencies, strange coincidences, and incomprehensible details in this case that do not fit into the picture of suicide at all. Therefore, I urge you, dear viewers, to share your versions of what really happened to Eliza in the comments. Who, in your opinion, could be her killer? What was the motive for this crime? I will be glad to hear your guesses and assumptions. Perhaps by joint efforts we can get closer to unraveling this mystery. And most importantly, let's think about how to protect ourselves from such a tragedy. After all, what happened to Eliza can happen to anyone. Here are a few tips I would like to give you. Be careful with new acquaintances, especially when traveling. Do not trust people you do not know well, even if they seem nice and friendly. Always inform your family and friends where you are going and with whom. Send them photos of the people you communicate with, especially if you are going to go somewhere together. Do not agree to offers to go to deserted or unfamiliar places, even if it is presented to you as an exciting adventure. Trust your intuition. If it seems to you that something is wrong, that you are in danger, immediately leave from there. Call for help. Have self-defense means with you, pepper spray, a stun gun, etc., and be ready to use them if necessary. Of course, all this does not guarantee 100% safety, but following these rules significantly reduces the risk of ending up in a situation similar to the one Elisa Lam found herself in, and let her death become a lesson and a reminder for all of us. The world is full of dangers, and we must be ready to avoid them or fight back. Take care of yourself, be vigilant, and may the tragedy that happened to Eliza never happen to any of you. Thank you for your attention, and do not forget to write in the comments what you think about this story. Your opinion is very important. Together we can get closer to the truth.